You've always believed loyalty was forever, especially when the relationship seemed solid and stable. But what almost no one talks about is the silent price you pay for depending on someone else's validation. At some point, even the most solid relationship begins to show small cracks. You sense, even if you don't want to admit it, that there's a constant shift going on beneath the surface. The need to be desired mixes with the fear of being replaced, creating a tension few men have the courage to face. But there comes a time when everything changes, and it's no wonder. The desire to feel desired can become a devastating force, especially after 40. It's not just about self-esteem. It's almost a hunger for recognition that's never completely satisfied. You notice different gestures. Looks that were once reserved for you now seek approval outside the home. The security that seemed unshakable begins to crumble, bringing with it a feeling of insecurity that's hard to explain. That's when you realize external validation can be costly for any solid relationship. Imagine a mature woman staring at her phone, waiting for a notification that makes her heart race, not from her husband, but from a stranger. This scene, which may seem far from your reality, is more common than many men would like to admit. There's a silent adrenaline rush in being noticed by someone outside, something that fills an internal void that only grows with time. For her, it's not just about physical betrayal, but about feeling alive again, desired and relevant. And for you, it's a shock to realize that the comforts of everyday life can easily be replaced by a moment of digital validation. This often invisible desire for validation grows precisely as youth begins to fade. The mirror no longer reflects the same image as years ago, and every small sign of aging becomes an uncomfortable reminder. It's during this phase that the search for external approval intensifies, as if each like or admiring glance could freeze time. You notice subtle changes from the way she dresses to the conversations she seeks. The truth is harsh. The more time passes, the greater the temptation to seek in others what has been lost within oneself. Families, careers, years of dedication can be thrown away for a momentary sense of importance, for a compliment, for a glance. What seems trivial to the outsider actually represents a powerful and silent internal battle. You wonder how everything you've built can be threatened by so little. But for those who feel the emptiness, that little is everything. It's at these times that logic loses out to emotion, and the past seems less important than the next notification. It's a dangerous cycle, in which the price paid is often only realized after everything has already been lost. What no one tells you is that, behind late-life betrayal, there's a hunger for validation that consumes everything, including your very sense of loyalty. It's not simply about looking for someone else, but about trying to reclaim a part of yourself that's been lost over the years. You may see the signs, but you rarely understand the full extent of this void until you experience it firsthand. Betrayal, in this context, ceases to be merely a moral error and becomes a desperate plea to be seen. And that's when many men realize they've been fighting an invisible enemy, the need for validation that's never been satisfied. In this video, I'll reveal how this pursuit becomes a trap nearly impossible to escape, and what signals the line has been crossed. Few have the courage to see the real mechanism behind this dynamic, because it requires facing uncomfortable truths about yourself and others. You may think you're immune, but no one is completely protected from this silent temptation. The key is identifying when a healthy desire for attention turns into destructive emotional dependence. Stay until the end, because understanding this process can be the turning point in your relationship and your own self-confidence. If you want to protect yourself from this dynamic before it destroys your life, subscribe to the channel now. What I'm about to reveal could save your relationship or your sanity. Don't underestimate the power of this cycle. It acts silently, but it can erode everything you've built so far. To truly understand how to defend yourself, we need to look back and analyze where this hunger for validation stems from. Only then will you have the clarity to act before it's too late. Feminine validation doesn't come out of nowhere. It's built during youth, when attention is abundant and almost automatic. For many women, being noticed is like breathing, natural, constant, almost guaranteed by the mere fact of existing. This flow of glances and compliments silently shapes the perception of self-worth. Over time, this attention becomes a central part of identity and self-esteem. This is where the root of emptiness begins, which can later develop into emotional dependence. As age advances, the scenario changes. The woman who was once the center of the universe now feels invisible, a feeling society cruelly imposes. The stares diminish, the compliments become rare, and what was once taken for granted becomes contested with every small gesture. This feeling of disappearing from the world is a hard blow for those who built their self-esteem on external attention. You notice often from the outside how this process generates insecurity and a desperate desire to regain lost radiance. Deep down, it's the pain of losing a silent power that was never truly understood. The decline in fertility, coupled with the cultural pattern of exalting youth, creates a chasm between how she was once seen and how she is now ignored. This distance is felt in the body, in the looks, and even in everyday conversations. What was once a source of pride now turns into doubt, fear, and even resentment. You often don't understand the weight of this silent grief, but it's there in every gesture and unspoken word. The woman who once had the world at her feet now must deal with the feeling of being disposable. This creates a profound void, not just emotional, but almost existential. It's not just about wanting to be desired, but about searching for a meaning that seems to have disappeared along with the stares. The silence of attention weighs heavily, like an absence difficult to fill. You realize how small actions can take on disproportionate weight when validation disappears. It's at this moment that the search for external recognition ceases to be a desire and becomes a vital necessity. Research shows that women's self-esteem declines after 40, precisely when opportunities for validation diminish dramatically. This isn't just a statistic. It's reflected in millions of real, often unspoken stories. The reflection in the mirror becomes a cruel reminder of the time that never returns. You begin to realize that the psychological impact is much deeper than you imagine, and that's when many relationships begin to face silent crises, fueled by this invisible wound. Women who were celebrated for their beauty or sensuality feel the impact of this social silence even more strongly. For them, the transition is brutal. From the center of attention to almost invisible figures in the social scene. What was once a source of power and security now becomes a source of insecurity and doubt. You notice this change in the details, in the way they dress, the tone of conversations, even in the small attempts at approval. It's an abrupt, difficult to accept decline that leaves deep scars on the identity of those who experience it. And this pain demands an immediate solution, relief, however small. That's why many women end up seeking external validation for what they can no longer find in the mirror or in their own partner. It's not just vanity, it's emotional survival in the face of the void left by time. You might see this as neediness, but for those who feel it, it's an urgent need. This is the point at which emptiness becomes a trap, and the cycle begins again, ever more difficult to escape. Seeking validation has never been easier. Instagram, WhatsApp, Tinder, and Facebook are full of married women hunting for small tokens of attention. Technology has transformed the desire for recognition into an open market, where every like becomes a microdose of self-esteem. Relationship status doesn't matter. The temptation to test one's worth is just a click away. You've probably noticed how innocent conversations can quickly turn into disguised flirtations. In this new landscape, validation has become a currency, and everyone is, in some way, participating in this game. Many begin with a simple like, an emoji, a seemingly innocent conversation. But the line between digital flirtation and betrayal is very thin. The cell phone becomes a secret gateway to parallel realities, where validation is instant and addictive. You might think it's nothing, but this frequent contact fuels a dangerous fantasy. Little by little, what was just curiosity becomes a necessity, and the quest for attention grows silently. In this silent game, it's easy to lose control without even realizing where everything started to go wrong. The new validation market doesn't require the courage to attract physically. The feeling of being noticed again is enough. There's no need to leave the house or face explicit moral dilemmas. It all happens between the lines of messages and likes. For many women, simply sparking interest acts as an emotional drug. You realize that the competition in this game isn't other men, but the quest for relevance itself. Ultimately, everyone becomes hostage to a system that fuels insecurity in exchange for crumbs of approval. The heroes of this phase are unknown followers, former colleagues, random men who offer small doses of approval. It doesn't matter if they're people without any real connection. What matters is the momentary feeling of importance. For every woman feeling the emptiness growing, a new follower can represent temporary relief, a reminder that she's still seen. You may have noticed these signs, but you rarely understand how significant they can be for someone starving for validation. It's in this cycle that dependency sets in, making the validation market increasingly crowded. This behavior is fueled by dopamine addiction. Every like or message triggers a momentary sense of importance. Technology has created a cycle of instant reward, where the next compliment or response is always eagerly anticipated. You've probably noticed how restless she becomes when she doesn't receive a response, as if something vital is missing. This mechanism is no different from other addictions, because it acts on the same regions of the brain responsible for pleasure and reward. The result is a relentless pursuit of stimulation, often at the expense of the relationship itself. The cycle repeats itself faster and faster, making the impulse almost impossible to control. What begins as a simple exchange of messages can become an obsession disguised as routine. You realize that any gap without a response becomes a cause for restlessness or even a bad mood. This emotional dependence grows silently, fueled by small, daily rewards. Eventually, the real relationship begins to lose ground to the endless market of digital validation. But why do so many risk everything for so little? What's really at stake? Behind this behavior lies an internal conflict between the fear of emptiness and the need to feel relevant. You can judge or try to control, but until you understand the root of this desire, you'll only see the surface of the problem. You need to look beyond the obvious to understand why the validation market has become so irresistible and so dangerous. When a woman seeks external validation, she is often risking everything she has built. It's not just the relationship that's at risk, but the entire structure of trust, respect, and even self-esteem. Every message exchanged, every compliment accepted, may seem harmless, but it represents high stakes. You feel the impact of this on the atmosphere in the home and in the emotional distance that gradually builds. What's at stake is not just love, but the very identity of those involved in this cycle. Families are destroyed, reputations are tarnished, children are affected, and worst of all, the extent of the damage isn't always fully realized. The quest for validation seems at first glance a harmless game, but its consequences go far beyond what one might imagine. You can try to minimize the signs, but the damage builds up silently. Small everyday choices open up huge rifts, where trust is lost and stability crumbles. In the end, the price paid can be irreversible for everyone involved. Behind every decision lies the dilemma between guilt and the desire to feel alive again. This internal conflict is intense. On one side, the fear of destroying everything you've built. On the other, the temptation to relive emotions that seemed forgotten. You realize that small actions can carry a disproportionate weight for someone already fragile. External judgment only increases the anguish, making the cycle even more difficult to break. Deep down, it's a silent battle between a past of loyalty and a present of desire. Many who have lost everything due to small transgressions can't even explain what led them there. The desire for validation acts like an invisible force, pushing boundaries without the person realizing how far they're straying from their own values. You might think it's a lack of character, but more often than not, it's a lack of self-knowledge and clarity about one's own needs. After everything falls apart, a void difficult to fill and a silent regret remain. The worst part is that, for some, the realization only comes when it's too late to turn back. The post-40 identity crisis is a black hole. What you once were is no longer enough. Recognition of the past doesn't fill the void of the present, and the feeling of inadequacy grows with each passing day. You notice signs of sadness, insecurity, or even self-destructive behavior, often masked by attempts to appear normal. The fear of no longer being desired mixes with the desperation to seek any kind of approval. In this scenario, even small transgressions take on disproportionate weight, further accelerating the cycle of self-sabotage. And almost always, betrayal begins with the invisible. It's rarely physical at first. It involves small concessions, seemingly harmless conversations, looks that deviate from the usual, and a silent need to feel something new. You may not notice anything immediately, but the emotional distance has already begun to grow long before any concrete action. This phase is dangerous because it allows everything to appear under control when, in fact, there's already a rupture. What's at stake is not just the relationship, but the very ability to trust again, in yourself and in the other person. Micro-betrayal is the name given to the first step toward the abyss, hidden messages, secret compliments, small everyday lies. This behavior is often ignored or even romanticized, as if it were just harmless fun. But for those on the other side, every gesture carries the weight of a silent betrayal. You feel the separation in detail, muted conversations, glances that avoid direct contact, increasingly empty justifications. Micro-betrayal is the beginning of a process that often ends in something bigger and more painful. It's just a friend. It's just a compliment. It doesn't mean anything. Classic phrases used to justify the unjustifiable. The truth is, every micro-betrayal begins with denial, with an attempt to hide the true weight of what you're doing, even from yourself. You've probably heard these excuses or perhaps even believed them, trying to preserve the peace. But each justification only serves to fuel the cycle of deception, making it easier to cross the next line. Self-deception is always the first step before the bigger fall. The routine changes. She distances herself, protects her phone, and starts keeping secrets. Small habits become warning signs for those paying attention. Even if they seem innocent at first glance, you feel the weight of the silence, the evasive answers, the ever-increasing gaps between real conversations. It's in these small breaches of trust that the relationship begins to fray from within. Micro-betrayal is never about the act itself, but about the emotional distance that sets in almost imperceptibly. Small doses of validation act as positive reinforcement, increasing desire and boldness. Every response received, every compliment exchanged, becomes an incentive to seek more, like a reward that never suffices. You realize the line of respect becomes increasingly blurred as the habit repeats itself. What was just curiosity becomes need, and the cycle intensifies without anyone realizing how far they've come. In the end, it's the sum of these small permissions that paves the way for greater betrayals. The cycle is addictive. The more she receives, the more she needs. Each message or like serves as an extra dose of self-esteem, feeding a void that is never completely filled. You notice her becoming irritated when she doesn't receive attention, as if something vital is missing. The relationship begins to compete with a parallel universe of quick gratification. In the end, what was once a distraction becomes an emotional dependence that's difficult to break. And when you realize it, it's too late to turn back. The compulsion has taken over. The feeling of freedom that seemed harmless now exacts a heavy price. Guilt, anxiety, and growing distance. You try to reconnect, but the barrier created by micro-betrayals hinders any true rapprochement. The emotional chasm grows silently, separating two worlds that were once one. Micro-betrayal is the beginning of the end for many relationships. Even when no one admits it out loud, the leap from digital validation to physical or emotional betrayal happens when an internal limit is crossed. It's not something that happens overnight. It's the result of small concessions that, when accumulated, break down any moral barrier. You feel when this point of no return is approaching. The signs are in the attitude, the look in the eyes, the sudden distancing. The feeling of guilt mixes with the adrenaline of experiencing something forbidden. It's at this moment that many relationships cross an invisible line from which they rarely return. Often this role is played by professional validators, co-workers, exes, personal trainers. These are people who, by being close or accessible, offer a constant dose of attention and recognition. You notice that the relationship, previously restricted to the digital world, begins to take shape in the real world. Small encounters, private conversations, and in-person compliments accelerate the breaking down of the last internal boundaries. The danger lies precisely in the naturalness with which these bonds intensify, almost always in the shadow of everyday life. The real case of someone who lost everything for an adventure almost always begins with a series of small permissions. What seemed harmless at first, a message, a coffee, a compliment, gives way to increasingly intimate encounters. You only understand the gravity of it when you realize how much these accumulated gestures have weakened all moral boundaries. When desire overcomes guilt, the irreversible happens, and the damage is far greater than imagined. The adventure, which promised excitement, leaves only a trail of destruction and regret. Data show that infidelity is rising by more than 40%, even among women in long-term relationships. This trend reveals that, for many, time together is no guarantee of safety or immunity from temptation. You can invest years building something solid, but if emotional needs are ignored, the risk silently increases. The existential crisis of this phase, combined with digital opportunities, makes the limit even easier to cross. It's a warning. No one is truly protected from this invisible danger. Still, many continue this risky game, even knowing the danger. The adrenaline of the forbidden, combined with the desire to feel alive, outweighs the fear of the consequences. You can warn, talk, or try to control, but deep down, every choice is driven by a need that logic can't resolve. Momentary pleasure masks the fear of collapse, creating an illusion of control. The irreversible limit is crossed long before any physical act. It begins with the decision not to turn back. Because deep down, what's at stake isn't the other person, it's themselves. The search for validation is, above all, an attempt to fill one's own emptiness, to prove to oneself that one still has value. You may feel betrayed or lost, but it's important to understand that this battle is happening within them, not against you. The irreversible limit is often a cry for self-acknowledgement, not just an escape from the relationship. Recognizing this is the first step to not losing yourself in the process. A woman trapped in this cycle no longer knows how to stop. The fear of growing old alone is greater than the fear of losing everything. This feeling becomes a silent emergency, making impulsive decisions seem justifiable. You notice how she oscillates between moments of guilt and bursts of self-confidence, trying to fill an inner void. Deep down, she fights against her own shadow, in a war that few around her can see. Self-sabotage becomes routine, and each choice only deepens the hole in which she is trapped. Validation brings guilt. Guilt brings promises to stop, but relapse is almost certain. The cycle repeats itself because each momentary relief seems stronger than any rational resolution. You notice empty promises and apologies that become part of the routine but are rarely accompanied by real change. The mind seeks to justify each slip-up, creating arguments to postpone the end of this self-destructive behavior. In the end, the feeling of helplessness only reinforces the idea that there is no easy way out of this maze. Ultimately, the issue is no longer about the relationship, it's about filling the inner void. The partner becomes a supporting character in a story of searching for meaning and self-acceptance. You can strive to please, understand, or even confront, but you realize that none of this solves the core of the problem. The need for validation becomes a personal compulsion, disconnected from love or logic. Self-sabotage sets in because, for those who feel emptiness, the fear of facing their own loneliness is unbearable. Some admit, "I feel dead inside when no one notices me." This phrase reveals a level of suffering that goes far beyond superficial neediness. You realize the problem isn't a lack of love, but of recognition from yourself and others. This existential void makes any compliment or message a temporary lifeline. In the end, each relapse in the search for validation is just another symptom of a pain that no one sees, but that consumes you from within. The drama becomes routine, and the more you try to resist, the more you lose. Attempting to control your impulses only fuels anxiety and feelings of inadequacy. You witness this daily battle, promises of change followed by new slip-ups, tears that give way to more attention-seeking. The relationship becomes a stage for emotional ups and downs, with no room for true connection. Self-sabotage at this point ceases to be a conscious choice and becomes a mode of survival. And all of this, almost always, is invisible to the partner. Suffering happens silently, hidden behind routine gestures and automatic responses. You may sense that something has changed, but you rarely understand the depth of the void that has set in. Emotional distance grows without a clear explanation, making any attempt at closeness a frustrated endeavor. Ultimately, self-sabotage creates a chasm between two people who, on the surface, still appear to be together. For your partner, the experience is one of confusion and exhaustion. You feel like you're losing ground for no apparent reason. The atmosphere at home changes, conversations grow colder, and intimacy slowly fades. With no logical explanation, you try to understand what's happening, but only find silence or vague answers. The feeling of helplessness grows, creating insecurity even about your own worth. The relationship begins to feel like a minefield, where every step can be interpreted as an invasion. You try to understand, help, win someone back, but you only grow further apart. Every attempt at rapprochement seems frustrated, as if nothing is enough to break through the invisible wall. You wonder if you did something wrong, if you've changed too much, or if you've lost your former spark. Doubt erodes self-esteem, fueling a cycle of pressure and resentment. Ultimately, the man feels increasingly alone within his own relationship, unable to access what's really going on. Your energy is drained, your self-esteem plummets, and mutual respect disappears. Daily wear and tear turns small arguments into silent battles. You feel like you're always lacking, trying to meet constantly changing expectations. The weight of no longer being a priority affects your mood, your performance, and even your health. Gradually, you begin to doubt your own worth, losing your sense of who you truly are. Instead of a companion, he becomes a spectator in a drama that isn't his. Intimacy becomes formality, and deep conversations give way to superficial dialogue or awkward silences. You try to participate, but you feel like you're always on the outside, watching a story where you no longer play a leading role. The feeling of exclusion is as real as it is painful, slowly undermining your self-confidence. Ultimately, the relationship devolves into a disconnected cohabitation, leaving deep scars on the male identity. Many men begin to doubt their own worth, becoming insecure, anxious, and reactive. This loss of self-esteem affects not only relationships, but also all areas of life: work, friendships, and personal projects. You feel the weight of not being enough, as if you're always owing something impossible to deliver. This insecurity can lead to extreme behaviors, from isolation to attempts at control that only drive you further apart. The invisible cost is high, the loss of your own essence and sense of purpose. Meanwhile, your partner tests your limits, provoking you in order to feel powerful and to see how far you can go. Small provocations become frequent, often disguised as a joke or a way to vent. You realize that everything becomes a test: your patience, your self-confidence, even your dignity. Each time you give in, respect diminishes a little more, fueling the cycle of insecurity. In the end, the man finds himself trapped in a game he never chose to play, always at a disadvantage. And the cycle only stops when someone decides to break up, or there's nothing left to save. Often the breakup is inevitable, the result of years of silent wear and tear and small emotional erosions. You realize there were no clear signs, just an invisible accumulation of distance and frustration. Responsibility falls on everyone involved, but the impact on the individual is profound and lasting. In the end, all that's left is to learn to recognize the patterns before it's too late. To protect himself, a man needs to develop clear boundaries and direct communication without giving in to paranoia. Establishing rules isn't about controlling your partner, but about protecting your own emotional integrity. You learn to identify warning signs without losing your rationality or reacting impulsively. Every decision should be guided by principles, not by fear or constant suspicion. Male armor is, above all, self-awareness applied to the relationship. The secret is strategic detachment. Don't beg for love. Don't accept crumbs. Don't negotiate respect. This doesn't mean coldness or indifference, but rather preserving your own dignity. You learn to value your time, attention, and energy as precious resources. Each concession must be conscious, not driven by need or fear of losing the relationship. The armored man understands that respect is earned and maintained, never begged for. Practical checklist: observe patterns, confront firmly, know when to walk away. Each of your partner's actions should be carefully evaluated, without rushing or making hasty judgments. You learn to differentiate real warning signs from mere momentary fluctuations. Confronting clearly demonstrates self-respect, without aggression or dramatization. Knowing when to walk away protects your own emotional health and maintains the integrity of your relationship. Investing in yourself is essential. Maintain a social life, projects, and self-esteem. You can't depend on your partner's validation to feel complete or relevant. Each personal achievement strengthens your position in the relationship and increases your inner confidence. A balance between your personal life and your relationship is the foundation for avoiding emotional vulnerability. Men who take care of themselves and develop themselves create a natural shield against subtle tests and manipulation. It's not about controlling the other person, but about not losing your own value in the process. You must act clearly, setting boundaries without giving in to manipulation or emotional pressure. Each conscious decision strengthens your presence and maintains the integrity of the relationship. Armored men know that respecting themselves is the first step to being respected by others. The goal is not to dominate, but to preserve your autonomy and dignity within the relationship. This is the only way to avoid falling into the trap of other people's validation. When you maintain clear boundaries, strategic detachment, and self-focus, the relationship ceases to be a source of insecurity. You realize that respect, trust, and intimacy are non-negotiable, and that protecting your value is an act of wisdom. Each conscious choice strengthens the relationship and avoids unnecessary emotional wear and tear. Men who apply these principles build a solid love life that is resistant to subtle manipulation. The final sign that validation has become a compulsion is when they put you down to feel desired or act as if they're superior to you. This behavior reveals that their focus is no longer on the relationship, but on their own ego and need for attention. You notice subtle changes, looks of contempt or sarcasm disguised as playfulness. It's a clear warning that emotional balance has been lost. Recognizing this sign is the first step in deciding how to protect yourself without losing your own dignity. At this point, the relationship has become a battlefield, and you need to decide whether to fight or walk away. Every word, gesture, or silence is fraught with tension, testing your emotional limits. You realize that trying to control or save everything alone only increases the strain. Assessing whether there's still room for sincere dialogue is essential before the conflict becomes irreversible. The conscious choice between confronting or walking away is key to preserving your integrity. For the next 7 days, observe. How often does your partner seek external approval? And how do you react? Note behaviors, patterns, and moments when her attention shifts outside the relationship. You'll notice subtle signs that go unnoticed in everyday life, but indicate emotional imbalance. This practice isn't spying, but an exercise in awareness to understand the dynamics of validation and protect your own emotional space. Write it down, reflect, and adjust your behavior. Practice strategic coolness and communicate your limits without fear. Each conscious decision strengthens your position and prevents you from being emotionally manipulated. You learn to react clearly, without giving in to provocation or silent pressure. The goal is not to punish, but to protect your dignity and autonomy. Men who apply this discipline are able to maintain mutual respect and balance in their relationships. Comment here. What's the most subtle sign of validation you've ever noticed in someone close to you? Reflecting on this helps you understand patterns that often go unnoticed. You realize how small gestures or words carry hidden meanings. This exercise increases your emotional awareness and strengthens your ability to identify warning signs. Sharing experiences also creates connection with other men facing similar situations. If this video opened your eyes, please like, subscribe, and help other men avoid being destroyed by this cycle. Because when the search for validation trumps loyalty, it was already gone long before you realized it. Every conscious action you take protects not only the relationship, but also your emotional integrity. You learn to recognize signs, maintain boundaries, and not give in to invisible pressure from others. In the end, true power lies in maintaining your own worth, regardless of the circumstances.